The fateful encounter. The sun hung low over the dense canopy, streaking the sky with hues of amber and crimson. Django, a seasoned hunter with keen eyes and steady hands, treaded lightly through the whispering forest. His village, a haven of peace and prosperity, lay beyond the towering trees, where his wife, Zola, awaited his return. Django had always been a man of instinct, but something about today felt different. The deeper he ventured, the heavier the air became, thick with an unseen weight. Then, amidst the tangled underbrush, he spotted something, or someone. A woman lay sprawled across the forest floor, her skin smeared with dirt, her clothes torn as if she had been running from something, or someone. Her breathing was shallow, her face peaceful yet oddly unsettling. Django hesitated, his grip tightening on his spear. There were tales of spirits who lured men into the unknown, tricksters that played with the minds of the living. Yet, something in him stirred, a deep, unshakable sense of duty. He couldn't leave her here. Scooping her into his arms, Django carried her back to the village. Each step sent a chill down his spine, an unease he could not place. Zola met him at the threshold of their home, her dark eyes sharp with knowing. "Who is this woman?" she asked, her voice steady yet laced with caution. "I do not know," Django admitted. But she needed help. Zola's instincts screamed at her to be wary. She had lived long enough to trust the whispers of her spirit, and something about this woman, Naya, as she would later introduce herself, felt wrong. But she pushed her concerns aside, offering a quiet nod as she helped prepare a place for their guest. That night, the village was unusually silent. The wind did not rustle the trees, nor did the night creature stir. Django lay beside Zola, eyes drifting shut, but sleep did not come easy. Somewhere in the darkness, a soft whisper called through the air. And then, a shadow moved where none should have been, the shadows of doubt. Naya recovered with unnatural swiftness. By the second day, the pallor of exhaustion had vanished from her face, and her movements were fluid, almost too graceful. She barely touched the food Zola prepared, nibbling at morsels but never seeming truly hungry. When she spoke, her voice carried a strange, melodic lilt, like a song drifting through the wind, unnerving yet captivating. Zola watched her carefully, her instincts prickling with unease. Naya often disappeared at odd hours, slipping into the night without a sound. When questioned, she only smiled, offering vague replies that left more questions than answers. The villagers whispered. They had seen the signs, how the dogs refused to go near Naya, how the children fell silent in her presence. Some murmured of spirits, of beings that walked among men wearing borrowed faces. One evening, as Zola tended to the fire, she noticed something strange near Naya's sleeping mat. Small, iridescent scales, shimmering under the dim light. A chill crept up her spine. She reached down to touch one, and the moment her fingers brushed against it, a vision flashed through her mind, dark waters, twisted figures riding beneath the surface, as glowing like embers in the abyss. She jerked her hand back, her breath quickening. That night, sleep eluded her. Django lay beside her, his breathing deep and steady, oblivious to the storm raging in her heart. Then, she heard it, whispers, weaving through the stillness of the night. The words were foreign, ancient, carrying an eerie cadence that made her skin crawl. Slowly, she turned her head toward Naya's mat. Under the pale glow of the moon, Naya's shadow stretched unnaturally across the walls, not like that of a woman, but something else. It moved on its own, twisting and writhing, detached from her still form. Zola clutched the fabric of her blanket, a cold sweat breaking across her brow. This was no ordinary woman. She had to uncover Naya's secret, before it was too late. The warning of the elders. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Zola set off toward the elders' hut. She moved with urgency, her heart a drumbeat of unease. The whispering winds carried the weight of unseen things, shadows lurking just beyond sight. Baba Tono's home stood at the edge of the village, a humble dwelling adorned with ancient carvings and charms meant to ward off evil. The elder sat outside, his eyes cloudy with age but sharp with wisdom. He had seen many seasons, many omens. Zola knelt before him, her voice hushed yet firm. "Baba, I seek your wisdom. There is a woman in our home a stranger Django brought from the forest. She is not what she seems." Baba Tono studied her for a long moment before exhaling deeply, as if releasing a burden. "I feared this day would come," he murmured, tracing patterns in the dust with a gnarled finger. "What do you mean?" Zola pressed. The elder's voice dropped to a grave whisper. "There is an old legend, one not often spoken aloud. Long ago, a serpent spirit walked among men, wearing the skin of a woman. She was beautiful, enchanting, but her heart was black as the abyss. She sought the strongest hunters, luring them in with false kindness before striking when they least expected. None who fell under her spell survived." Zola's breath hitched. "A serpent spirit?" Baba Tono nodded. "They say she feeds on more than flesh, she consumes strength, the very essence of those she ensnares. If Django does not open his eyes, his fate is sealed." Zola's hands curled into fists. She would not let that happen. As she turned to leave, Baba Tono called after her. "Beware, child. She grows bold. The closer she comes to revealing herself, the more dangerous she becomes." That night, the village slept, but Zola remained awake, her pulse strumming with determination. When Naya slipped out of the hut, silent as a shadow, Zola followed. The forest swallowed them whole, the trees whispering secrets in the darkness. Zola moved carefully, each step calculated, her breath barely a whisper. Then, in a small clearing bathed in moonlight, Naya stopped. Zola pressed herself against a tree, watching, waiting. Naya lifted her hands to the sky, her form trembling. Then, before Zola's horrified eyes, her skin began to shift, scales rippling beneath the surface, her limbs elongating unnaturally. Her once melodic voice turned into a guttural hiss as she spoke in a language long forgotten by mankind. The air thickened with an unseen force. A presence loomed, something ancient, something hungry. Zola covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. This was no woman. This was a monster. And Django was in grave danger. The unveiling of the truth. Zola's breath came in short, silent gasps as she pressed herself against the rough bark of the tree, eyes wide with terror. Before her, under the cold silver glow of the moon, Naya shed her human skin like a discarded cloak. A sickening crack echoed through the clearing as her limbs contorted, stretching beyond the limits of any mortal body. Her flesh darkened, rippling with iridescent scales that shimmered like molten gold. Her fingers lengthened into razor-sharp claws, and her eyes, once deep and hypnotic, glowed a merciless, predatory yellow. Then came the sound, a low, guttural hiss that slithered through the air like a whisper of death. Naya's mouth parted, revealing fangs curved like twin daggers, glistening with venom. She raised her head toward the heavens, her elongated form weaving through the night, and from her throat came a series of eerie, echoing chants. The very air around her shuddered, charged with dark energy, as if she were summoning something from beyond the veil of the living. Zola did not wait to find out what answered the call. Barefoot and trembling, she turned and ran. The desperate plea. Zola burst into their home, gasping for breath. Sweat dampened her brow, but her fear burned hotter than any exhaustion. She shook Django awake, her hands gripping his shoulders with frantic urgency. "Django, listen to me. She is not what she seems. I saw her transform." Django groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Zola, what are you saying? She is a serpent spirit. A deceiver. I saw her shed her skin, I saw her fangs, her scales. Her voice cracked with desperation. Django sat up, frowning. He wanted to deny it, to dismiss it as a nightmare, but unease clawed at his chest. The strange way Naya barely ate. The odd hours she disappeared. The whispers in the dark. And then there were the scales Zola had found. He had ignored it all, convincing himself that Naya was simply a lost soul in need of kindness. But deep down, a terrible realization began to take root. Zola saw the shift in his face, the way his jaw tightened, his muscles coiling as if bracing for battle. I need you to trust me, she whispered. Django exhaled slowly, they nodded. I do. The confrontation. The door creaked open. Naya stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlit night. Her head tilted ever so slightly, her lips curving into a knowing smile. You're both awake, she murmured, stepping inside with unnatural grace. Django rose to his feet, standing between Zola and Naya. His voice was firm, steady. Tell me the truth, Naya. Who are you? Naya's golden eyes flickered, her smile widening, revealing just a hint of something sharp. Something inhuman. And then, she laughed, a soft, melodic sound that sent ice through Zola's veins. Oh, Django, Naya whispered, stepping closer. I was hoping you would never ask. The deadly battle. Naya's laughter slithered through the air like the whisper of 1,000 serpents. The dim firelights flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows across the hut walls. Her golden eyes gleamed with a cruel amusement as she stepped forward, her movements unevenly smooth, like a predator savoring the final moments before the kill. Django and Zola stood their ground, their bodies tense with anticipation. You truly don't understand, do you? Naya purred, tilting her head. I was sent for you, Django. The spirits marked your fate long before you stumbled upon me. Django's fingers curled into fists. The spirits do not take lives without reason. Oh, but they do, Naya countered, her voice dripping with malice. You and your ancestors have stolen from the land, taken what was not yours. The spirits have watched, and they have decided. Zola took a cautious step forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. If the spirits wished to punish Django, they would not have sent a liar to do it. Naya's smile vanished. The air grew thick, heavy, pulsing with an unseen force. And then, without warning, she struck. A battle of flesh and shadow. One moment, Naya stood before them, a woman draped in silken robes. The next, she twisted violently, her bones snapping and reforming, her flesh rippling as iridescent scales erupted along her arms and neck. Her fingers elongated into talons, and her jaw unhinged slightly, revealing fangs glistening with venom. She lunged at Django with inhuman speed. He barely dodged, rolling to the side as her claws slashed through the air where he had stood. The wooden wall behind him splintered from the impact. Zola grabbed a burning log from the fire pit and swung it at Naya, but the serpent woman moved too fast, twisting away with a hiss. Django snatched a spear from the wall and leveled it at her. Leave now, Naya. This fight does not have to end in blood. Naya's laughter returned, harsher now, edged with rage. Oh, but it does. With unnatural grace, she slithered forward, her body shifting between human and beast. One moment, she was a woman, beautiful, haunting. The next, she was a monstrous serpent, her torso elongating, her skin hardening into glistening scales. She struck again. Django barely managed to parry her attack, the spear's tip grazing her side. But instead of retreating, Naya twisted her body in an impossible motion, coiling around him with terrifying speed. Her tail tightened around his chest. Django gasped as his ribs strained under the pressure. The power of love and unity. Django! Zola screamed, her hands fumbling for the small pouch tied at her waist. Boba Tono's sacred charms. With shaking fingers, she pulled out a handful of ground herbs and a small calf stone. She crushed the herbs in her palm, whispering an incantation the elder had taught her. The air shifted. A faint golden light flickered in her grasp. She dashed forward and pressed the charm against Naya's scaled skin. A shriek split the night. Naya recoiled, her grip loosening as a dark, smoky energy rose from her body. She writhed in pain, her form shifting violently between human and serpent. Django coughed, gulping air into his burning lungs. Wasting no time, he grabbed his spear, his eyes locking onto Naya's weakened stance. This ends now. With every ounce of strength left in him, he drove the spear forward. The tip struck true. Naya let out a piercing wail, her body convulsing as the weapon forced her into her true form, a monstrous serpent, its golden scales now darkened with an unnatural energy. The ground trembled as she writhed, her form growing weaker, smaller. The spirit's power was leaving her. She lifted her head one last time, her eyes, once filled with cunning and cruelty, now filled with something else. Fear. And then, with a final, haunting hiss, Naya collapsed. Her form crumbled into dust, carried away by the wind. The aftermath. The hut was silent. The night air, once thick with dark magic, now felt lighter, almost cleansed. Django and Zola stood side by side, breathing heavily, their bodies aching, but their hearts steady. Django turned to his wife, reaching for her hand. You saved me. Zola smiled wearily. We saved each other. The spirits had tested them. And together, they had prevailed. But as the wind carried Naya's ashes into the night, a single thought lingered in Zola's mind. Had the battle truly ended? Or had they only just begun to understand the power lurking in the shadows? The victory and the lesson. The air was still, thick with the remnants of Naya's presence. The wind carried her vanishing essence away, but Zola knew defeated was not the same as destroyed. Django leaned against her, his chest rising and falling in deep, ragged breaths. His wounds ached, but it was nothing compared to the weight pressing against his heart. He had trusted Naya. He had doubted Zola. And it had nearly cost him his life. Zola squeezed his hand, her warmth anchoring him. We won, she whispered. Django exhaled, his grip tightening. For now. They returned to the village. As dawn broke, Django and Zola made their way back to the village. The sun's first light bathed the land in gold, a stark contrast to the dark battle they had fought hours before. Birds chirped in the trees, the river hummed its endless song, and the world continued as though nothing had changed. But they had. The villagers gasped at their arrival, rushing to their side with questions and concern. Mothers clutched their children close, elders murmured prayers under their breath, and the hunters, Django's brothers in arms, watched him with weary eyes. Boba Tono stepped forward, leaning heavily on his carved staff. His gaze swept over them, lingering on the bruises and cuts that marred their skin. But when he looked into their eyes, he saw something deeper. Understanding. Strength. Transformation. You have returned, Boba Tono said solemnly. And yet I see a shadow in your heart. Django met his gaze, his voice firm. We fought a spirit who wore the skin of a woman. She came for me, but Zola saw the truth when I did not. The villagers gasped. Whispers spread like fire among them. The old stories, someone muttered. It's true. The serpent spirits still walk among us. Django was almost lost. But Zola, she saved him. Boba Tono raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. His eyes gleamed with knowing. Dark spirits will always test the strong, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. But true love and wisdom can overcome any evil. He turned to Zola, nodding. You listened when others did not. You trusted the whispers in the wind, the warnings woven into the night. And because of that, you and Django stand before us today. Zola bowed her head in respect, but her voice was steady. I only did what needed to be done. Boba Tono chuckled. And that, my child, is the mark of true wisdom. A night of celebration and reflection. That night, the village came alive with celebration. Fires roared high, illuminating the faces of those who had once feared the dark. Drums echoed through the night, and laughter filled the air. The people danced, honoring the triumph of love and courage over deceit and malice. But Django and Zola sat a little apart, watching the flames flicker. Django turned to his wife, his voice softer than the rustling leaves. I should have listened to you sooner. Zola smiled, brushing a gentle hand against his cheek. What matters is that you listened when it counted. Django exhaled, eyes reflecting the dancing firelight. She almost won, Zola. But she didn't, Zola said firmly. Because we fought together. Django nodded, the weight on his heart easing. He reached into his pouch, pulling out the small carved stone Boba Tono had given them before the battle. The sacred charm that had burned Naya's skin, revealing her true form. He turned it over in his hands, lost in thought. Do you think she will return? He asked. Zola was silent for a moment, then said, perhaps not in the way we expect. But spirits do not forget so easily. They sat together as the village rejoiced, knowing that this was not just a victory, it was a lesson. The lesson that would never be forgotten. As the flames crackled and the night stretched on, Boba Tono rose from his seat, lifting his hands for silence. The drums quieted. The people turned to their elder. This tale will be told for generations, Boba Tono declared, his voice weaving into the night like an eternal thread. A story of a hunter who nearly lost his life, of a wife whose wisdom saw the truth, and of a spirit who tried, but failed, to claim them. He met the eyes of every villager. Let this be a lesson to us all, never ignore the whispers of intuition, for the unseen world is always watching. Django and Zola exchanged a glance, their fingers entwining. They had faced darkness. They had fought together. And they had won. For now. But as the embers of the fire floated into the star-filled sky, one thing remained certain, there would always be shadows in the world, waiting, watching, testing. And when the time came again, they would be ready. Epilogue, the Serpent's Whisper. The village slept soundly, comforted by the knowledge that the serpent spirit had been defeated. But deep in the heart of the forest, beneath the ancient canopy where moonlight barely touched the ground, the shadows stirred. A pool of silver water rippled unnaturally, its surface reflecting not the sky above, but something else, something dark, something waiting. The wind carried whispers, ancient and unreadable, through the trees. From the base of a twisted, gnarled tree, movement broke the stillness. A single, gleaming scale lay upon the ground. And then, the hiss. Low. Dangerous. Unforgiving. The battle had been won. But the war was far from over.